Well, good afternoon, folks. I'm Rex Lamore, Director of the Center for Community and Economic Development, and one of the members of our core team here at Michigan State University that's really been exploring the concepts of circularity and working with our colleagues across the campus to facilitate a number of informal conversations about folks' research, instruction, and outreach in the field of circularity, with the goal in mind of strengthening our capacity to implement our shared mission and helping industry, communities, and students understand circularity and be more effective in the world of the material circular concept. So I'm glad to welcome you to our fourth forum that we've hosted. We are planning on one more this semester. So thank you for being with us. Today, I'd like to just say a couple things about some of our team members who've been working on behalf of the forums. That includes Professor Rafael Aras in packaging, Professor Larry Drzal in the College of Engineering, Professor Vedat Verder, who'll be joining us today as a presenter, and some of the research assistants here in the Center for Community and Economic Development, that including Ms. Kelly Humes, Ms. Olivia Wheeler, and Mr. Toby Hayes. They've all been supporting our efforts in building our collegial network around circularity. So with that, let me introduce our first presenter, and that is Professor Vedat Verder, who serves as the chairperson of the Department of Supply Chain Management here at Michigan State University in the Broad College of Business. He specializes on the application of operations research for tackling challenges in the public sector. Professor Verder's areas of research include service chain design, hazardous material logistics, sustainable operations, and healthcare operations. And as I mentioned, he's been a member of our core team, helping to strategize how we can strengthen our circular research, outreach, and instruction here at MSU. Then following Professor Verder's presentation will be Professor Akhtal. Dr. Akhtal is an associate professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department within the College of Engineering. Her research focuses on the design for the environment, which is used as a holistic approach to ensure that all stages of the life cycle of a product or system are environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable. Dr. Akhtal uses proactive sustainability assessment to reduce the environmental impact of new technologies.
Thank you very much, Rex. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for attending today's panel, and also I'm happy to be presenting together with Anik, and I'll take the next 20 minutes or so in giving you an overview of the type of things that we work on and we're interested in working on in the area of sustainable supply chains. Because of my interest and expertise in the public sector, I presume a regulator's perspective in studying these problems. But of course, you would quickly realize that in order to understand how a regulator can channel or incentivize or sometimes mandate certain type of behaviors, from the industry, they have to have a quite a robust and solid understanding of how the industry would respond to certain policies. So the regulator's perspective, in my mind, incorporates also the industry's response to potential policies. What I wanted to do is to give you a brief overview and then give a couple of examples of some of the more recent research that we have been conducting, and hopefully that would open the floor for some fruitful discussion and maybe some offline discussion. So let me put it put our work in the bigger picture. So the regulators would make a policy choice, and that would have an economic impact and an environmental impact. And that direct link is well studied by environmental economists and others. Now, having a policy in place, doesn't mean that it is successfully and effectively implemented. So therefore, we look at the, from a supply chain perspective, we look at the implementation of that policy, meaning we investigate the implications of the policy choice at the operational level in detail, in the supply chain detail. We look at the producer's response or consumer's response to this implementation, and therefore we try to generate a more efficient estimate of the economic and environmental impact. So that's how supply chain goes into the picture. It's a more micro as opposed to a macro approach, if you will. So as you all know, there are at least 3 reasons for firms to engage in circular economy. They may be interested in improving their triple bottom line, a term that we're all familiar with. They need to comply with legislation, or in some cases, they actually see profit opportunity in engaging in circular economy, and that will be a completely voluntary activity for the firm. Now, one example that I'm familiar with is Intel. We have had many conversations with them since I joined Michigan State 2 years ago, because they sit on our Supply Chain Management Council in the department. And for Intel, for example, the sustainable supply chain issue, which they represent as supply chain responsibility, is part of the larger initiative of corporate social responsibility. And you see here, it's coupled with environmental responsibility, diversity, inclusion, and social impact. Now, if you take a step back, what they're actually trying to do is to keep in mind the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, where our topic is particularly relevant to goal number 8 and goal number 12. Now, if you look at the, from a regional perspective, there is some evidence that a circular economy would be helpful or would bring in tangible benefits for Great Lakes. And a recent report from U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, made an attempt to quantify those benefits for steel, plastics, and pulp and paper, which are sort of the stronger industry activity in our region. So whether you look at it from an individual company perspective, or a regional perspective, or from a national/global perspective, there are countless motivations to engage in that. Now, the question becomes, well, if this is so clear, why is there a need for legislation? Well, there could be a need for legislation because the way the industry would voluntarily engage, that level may not be adequate from the perspective of the targets of the regulator, for example, the European Union, as an example. So what they are interested in is to rationalize the consumption of virgin materials, incentivize the design of environmentally friendly products, and, for example, particularly in Europe and Japan, diversion of end-of-use and end-of-life materials from landfills due to land constraints. So, as in the case of Canada, the industry will always argue that they would do this, voluntarily themselves, and there's no need for legislation. But we have seen in the Canadian example, which I will talk a little bit more later, is that while the national target was about 60–70% of collection and recycling, the industry stewardship program actually settled for a 35–40%, which is sort of 50% of the government's targets. So in those cases, the regulator needs to use some of the policy tools in their tool bag to improve the sustainability and circularity of operations. So you can actually there are 2 extreme schools of thought here. One is the approach that's popular in Europe, particularly in Germany, that you can mandate things. Well, the other extreme is in the US. You can believe that price-based markets will solve everything. And Canada doesn't like markets as much as the Americans, whereas they don't like mandatory requirements as much as the Europeans. So therefore, they implement. They're somewhere in between. You can either view this as an intelligent policy, or you can claim that they don't know what they're doing. That's why they're in between somewhere. Now, but when we refer to Europe or US, I mean, Europe is maybe slightly more unified, but this map from the US that shows with different colorings, the different types of policies that are implemented in different states, shows you that because many of the issues around sustainability are state-related issues and under state jurisdiction, different states implement different policies, and therefore, if you're a company dealing with the U.S. market, now the question is, well, where would you anchor your operations? Of course, if you want to be more progressive, then you would anchor for California, but you may or may not want to do so. But if you anchor for somewhere else, well, can you operate in California? That becomes so these kind of state level differences are important issues. Now, let me go deeper in terms of the policy tools, because that's what we study by the use of mathematical or simulation models. So first of all, you can set some targets for collection rates, recycling rates, or reuse rates, or you could legislate take back. And examples of this is in the areas of packaging, hazardous substances, vehicles, and of course the most popular one is the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive that was originally cast in 2001-2, and then of course the industry found a number of loopholes in that directive, and it turned out to sort of a recycling initiative rather than truly incentivizing the design of environmentally friendly products. Therefore, they recast the WEEE in 2012, and we have performed quite a bit of work studying the electronic waste. Now, on the other hand, you can use price-based tools, and you can tax on the use of virgin materials. You can give subsidies for recycling. You can implement advanced disposal fees, and you can actually also look at deposit-refund requirements. Now, one of the examples I will give as our own work is the detailed work we have done in deposit refund. And that's because the environmental economists have claimed for a long time that this is a very versatile tool, but in reality, we see that only in aluminum cans and bottles and tires and car batteries. And so the industry have lobbied forcefully against more versatile use of deposit refund requirements, and we wanted to study the discrepancy between the industry's views and the environmental economists' views. So that brings me to my first example of from our work. The idea is that we wanted to be able to explain the discrepancy between the industry's view that if you increase the deposit, you're in effect increasing the price. So therefore, while increasing the deposit amount, which will be refunded when the container is brought back, for example, would increase the collection, it will also detract from the sales opportunity. So therefore, they would suffer from reduced profits. So to study that, we worked in this triad type model, where on the one side there is the retailer and collector, and there's a product flow from the retailer to the product holder, the consumer, and the consumer may or may not return the return the product. Now, the regulator tries to impact this by setting a deposit amount, and so of course the understanding is that if the deposit is higher, then it's more likely that the consumer is going to return the product. But of course, the catch is that, well, as the deposit increases, then maybe the consumer decides not to buy the product. And this would, of course, definitely depend on the network structures that are in effect for retail and collections, meaning how convenient is to return the product, such as a Coke can or a beer bottle, and the financial incentives that are in place. And of course, we assume that the consumer's decision is independent, it's done independently from other consumers. Using this framework to develop a mathematical model, we were able to study the situation and calibrate our models for, by using the information on tires. What you see here is what happens when the current practice of industry is at work, which means that you tell me the deposit, and I'll just reflect that deposit on the price. So the idea is that, as in what you see here in the horizontal axis, is the amount of deposit that's regulated by the government, and so the price is at a certain level. And as the deposit is increasing, then the effective price becomes this diagonal, because you're just adding the price to the deposit. And as a result, and as suggested by many members of the industry's lobbies, then as a result of this, you could see that the profit curve is expected to decrease. Now, so this is correct, but only if based on the assumption that you would just simply you would say, as an industry, I have nothing to do with this deposit. It's not my job to watch for the environment. So therefore, I'm just going to reflect whatever that is on the price. Now, there's a smarter way of doing things, which we found and identified using a pricing model, and that shows that actually it is to the benefit of both industry and the government if the industry was partially subsidizing the deposit. In other words, while reflecting the deposit fully on the price would be this line, the industry, if it wanted to optimize the price, then it would actually be somewhere below a subsidy below that level, and that would, as you could see, affect the profit curve, and actually industry can benefit from an increased amount of deposit with the right pricing strategy, and they're benefiting from the increased amount of deposit because they're actually selling more and collecting more under this strategy. Of course, there's a lot to be discussed here, but I'm going to leave it here. But I wanted to make a further comment on the sort of the perverse nature of this deposit refund scheme, and that is the ideal or the most preferred scenario for the industry is that actually the consumer pays the deposit and never returns the product, so therefore the deposit stays with the company, and that creates interesting twists, on this problem. Now I'll take another 5 minutes to give you another example of the type of work that we do, and this is looking at the joint impact of environmental awareness and system infrastructure on collection, which means that you can make collection sites as convenient as possible, meaning as closer as possible to people to drop off their end-of-use products. But there's something called environmental awareness, and if that is low, maybe they will not do that. And if you can actually, at the same time or alternatively, increase your investment in training people in terms of the good sides of being environmentally friendly, they might actually return goods in a less convenient, even in a less convenient network. Now, we have studied this in this particular problem in Vancouver, British Columbia, and this is the existing collection network that in the greater Vancouver area about 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago, when we studied this. So we looked at a 11-year data, and this, as I mentioned, the collection activity in Canada is run by industry associations. The particular association that runs this in British Columbia is Electronics Products Recycling Association. So that's a collaboration of industrial firms to, in my view, undercut the government regulation and try and collect what they could collect, but not necessarily get pushed around too much. So here's the data. As you can see, the collection rate over the 2008-2018 time window shows some positive increase from lower than 25% to over, around 45%. That sounds good, as long as you don't know that the national target is 70%. You can see that this is the curve that shows the number of collection sites. So they're increasing the number of collection sites. And this is the amount of, per 1,000 people, the amount of money that was spent on advertising initiatives so that they can sort of increase the environmental awareness of people and motivate people to return their electronic wastes. As you could see, while making the return activity more convenient as a drop-off activity, the investment in advertisement has decreased over time. So we again used a continuous mathematical model to represent the situation that I'm not discussing with you here, but I'll just finish with giving you some intuition as to what we found in terms of the different patterns of collection targets. So what we were able to do, looking at this problem, is to look at four alternative policies, and the difference between these four policies is that the first one is the most ambitious policy, and they want a 60% target, 60% collection from day one, and the other ones are increasing the collection rate. For example, the L4 is the most realistic one. That is, they start with a 25% collection rate and gradually hit to the target 60% in 4 years, and etc. So what we're able to do is to simultaneously optimize the collection facility network, meaning the number of collection sites, as well as the advertisement investments, to guarantee or to achieve the target, within the desired pattern. What we found out is that what we found out was that in British Columbia, while their number of collection locations is not too far from the optimal, they are not optimally located. So they could actually provide a higher level of convenience to people who are returning their electronic goods. What we also found out was that the level of advertisement investment was not at the sufficient level. So they could, in both cases, they could do a little bit better. So in the interest of time, I will say thank you. I will pick on our lovely business school, and I'm open to your comments, particularly, and questions.
Okay, so thanks for giving me a little bit of time to present about my research. So it's going to be a little bit different format. I actually didn't attend those forum before because I usually teach until pretty late on Monday. So I ran here after early ending class. So a lot of my research is actually related to circular economy. So I decided to, first of all, just give me a few minutes to kind of describe my background and how does that fit with what I'm doing. So my background is I have a bachelor in engineering and a master in materials engineering. So like looking at how materials is made and their properties and how we transform that is what I've been doing for a really long time. So I did then, I started actually a PhD in microsystem, but I switched to sustainability to work on the fabrication life cycle assessment of solar cells, in particular like photovoltaics, organic photovoltaics. And at the same time, I did work for a while, for a little bit at the UN, so in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the project I had there was actually related to like sustainability, life cycle assessment, and how can we reduce the impact of manufacturing for like developing countries. So it was kind of related to circular economy. Then I work as postdoc for Brookhaven National Lab, but my work was for First Solar on recycling solar panels and reducing the impact of recycling. So how to return again like the material for making new panels. And I've been I was faculty at Clemson for 2 years, and I've been at Michigan State for more than 6 years now. I'm associate professor now. So in terms of like current recent project, I put in yellow like what are kind of related to circular economy. So I'm not going to talk about everything, but I do have project related to like pavement and how we can reuse plastic in pavement and like scrap tire for pavement and other things like that. I do have project on like recycling plastic, plastic cleaning with John Dorgan. So I think he's presented already in that forum, so I'm not going to talk about that. Also, the assistant director for a new DOE Industrial Assessment Center. So as part of that effort, we're kind of helping some manufacturers if they are interested in reducing their waste and finding opportunity for circular economy. But the project I'll talk more about today are related to the work I've been doing for Ford on second life batteries and recycling. And I have a new project now starting on specifically on circular economy and recycling used batteries. And I've been also doing a lot of work on solar and other material for energy application. So most of my work, like, and that's most of what I want to talk about, not like of my other work on like pavement and plastic, but my main focus has always been like energy application. So like what material we're using in making solar and battery systems. So I do life cycle assessment. So looking at all the stage from mining the material, depending on the location, how do we process material, assemble it, and finally, what is the impact of using it? And more now that there is kind of a problem with the supply chain, in particular for like silicon, like how can we recycle those products at end of life and kind of putting it back into reuse in new products. So as part of that effort, I've had different projects, but like right now, one example of the project I'm doing, I work with MLUC Semiconductor here in Midland in identifying like opportunities for reducing or like improving their circular economy and finding opportunities for their waste to be used in other products. So some of the example for like PV manufacturing, so I've been looking for a long time about like the impact of making silicon solar panels in the US and China. So I like that the previous presenter talked about like supply chain, because a lot of the work I do is looking at like where are things made and what is the impact of doing it in different part of it, like different countries, and how much can we make in the US versus other country based on the resource we have. So we did look in that case about like the impact of producing silicon, and like the US has a lot of quartz, but we don't produce as much like MG silicon. Now it's mostly in China. So the impact of producing from different source and so on, and the impact of module manufacturing, how to reduce like the greenhouse gas of manufacturing solar panels over time, and like future production based on new technologies or improve like recycling of some of the components. So that's part of what we're doing there. So I do a lot more on solar panels, but in particular, I've worked on, as I said before, with First Solar on like the cadmium telluride, and there's a lot of the issue with like the scarcity of not cadmium necessarily, but mostly tellurium. So we look at a new source for tellurium from like either like the traditional copper route or opportunity for like direct mining or recycling. So. And how will the future market change for like PV modules or for other applications such as thermoelectric or metallurgy? So to figure out like, do we have enough material for what we expect to be the market for CAD telluride in the future? So we do for this project some system dynamics modeling. So looking at like in historical data, like what was the price, the market for tellurium and byproducts, and kind of forecasting based on new technology, modeling the process for those extraction, and looking at existing and future mine resource, what is the potential for new mining. So we're kind of looking at the environmental performance depending on the source, and like what is the advantage of recycling versus mining in new location, but also considering some supply risks. So my co-PI on that project, on that NSF project, is from political science, so he's looking at the impact of mining more in certain countries. That could be kind of an issue, and some like geopolitical factors associated with that. So the other thing I wanted to mention is I've been doing a lot of work I didn't put Ford anywhere on that, that side, but it's all work with Ford for the last 6 years at least. So we started like 6 years ago, actually getting battery from like used EV and testing them and figure out like using battery testing to figure out like under what kind of use would they last longer. So we developed a protocol for like residential battery storage, for peak shaving or fast charging that correspond to different use of second life batteries, and then looking what should we do with those used battery from electric vehicles. So is it better to use it in house application, or should we put them in EV fast charging application, or would they work great in like grid application? So so all of this work is kind of combining like the technical feasibility, the environmental impact of that, and the cost. And for all of those, we always compare with like new type of storage, but also we include, so we did study a lot as part of this project, like would it be better to recycle it or to use them as second life battery? Because one of the issue when we're doing second life battery is that all the materials cannot be returned for making new batteries. So there is kind of a delay in supply for new batteries, and that's something that auto manufacturers start to be a bit worried with the rapid increase in EV and electric vehicles and demand for larger and larger batteries. So as I said, we look at the impact of remanufacturing in secondary application and the impact on like the cost of electricity, depending on the city where you put that. So I do both like energy system modeling and like kind of an economic, techno-economic assessment and environmental assessment of those different applications. And as I said before, looking at like residential, utility scale, residential and for like the cost and greenhouse gas. So the second part of the project we did with Ford, all that was kind of the first project we did. The second part, not really, I cannot really show the full result, but part of what we've developed is an intuitive decision tool for battery storage, solar and EV charging. So like the interface looks something like that, but you can kind of specify a lot of information about like the battery and how it's used to design a new system, but also it helps for the researcher model like the price of recycling or make decision about recycling different type of battery chemistry and where should that recycling take place. So we're now starting like the third phase of that project. So we're still working on that interface, but instead of being more about like how to design like a second life energy storage from used battery, what we're looking at is how should recycle those batteries. So we're looking at the decision in terms of like process, but also location for the recycling and how could that re-enter like the supply chain for battery manufacturing. So and finally, one completely different project, even though I said I didn't talk about that so much. So I do have quite a few projects on like scrap tire or other plastic for pavement, because well, it's been like the pavement industry is using a lot of like petroleum or concrete or other materials like that. So they try to reduce their impact by using like scrap tires. So I work with people in the civil department, more in pavement, to kind of combine both, like how do we design new mix for pavement and how they perform over time. And this is one of my students' PhD work, looking at like different alternative material with different kind of scrap tires material and how they both perform in terms of technical performance, but also making sure that we're not like creating a new issue. So it is actually like lower in terms of like carbon emission and environmental impact over time. So we also did some like toxicity study and looking at what leach from those pavement if you're using scrap tires. So you don't want to make it worse than the relative material and see what is leaching from it. So that's all I have for this presentation. So I think it was saying 10 or 15 minutes. So if there is any question, I'll be happy to answer.
So I think I have a quick question. In the decision support tool, and this is Vedat, in the decision support tool, what's the decision being made, and what is there a model behind that, or?
Yeah, there's actually multiple models behind it. So and I cannot discuss all of that. That's why I just show like what kind of decision, but it makes a decision about like if right now should they prefer to do recycling or second life batteries in terms of like decision for as a whole in terms of like how much material they need for manufacturing future things like that, or like the chemistry of batteries are changing. So what type of battery should be recycled, which one should be remanufactured, or which one, or what volume, I would say, of each one needs to be like recycled versus mining primary material. That's mostly what it gives you.
Hey, real quick question, maybe more from a consumer's perspective for both of you in light of the electrification, if you will, of the automobile industry, and what appears from the consumer's perspective is like, this is nirvana, this is going to solve all these problems and things like that. How has that affected your research, or amplified it, or accelerated it to maybe bring some more reasonable minds to this conversation? Because, you know, from the source of the product and where that's going to come from, the recycling of the material that's already there, just the electrification of the world, and in terms of you mentioned fast charging stations. Anik, is it Anik or Anik? Anik, thank you. And so, but it's kind of fascinating to me, because it's there's a lot, from my perspective, a lot of consumer confusion out there, and you know, how do we help that dialogue?
Well, I can say, well, something. So yeah, everybody thinks it's just gonna solve everything, and there's no issue with like renewables and all those technology. But at the same time, I think for electric vehicles, people are worried about the energy intensity and the carbon footprint of making the batteries, because it's been quite a lot in the news. So people seem to know more about that than they would be, for example, on solar or wind energy. So, and like I work on these three aspects, and I get a lot more from people worried about how much energy or how much carbon footprint of, because people come and say, oh, but it's worse to have an EV because of all the energy or the carbon in making that battery, which is not true. But it's not as much known for the other type of technology. But if we want more wind turbines, there's also a lot of like rare earth issue. If we want more solar panels, like silicon, everybody will say, oh, it comes from sand, but it's not any type of sand. Like it's really high purity sand. And so there are some environmental impacts. So I think part of what I do teach, like life cycle assessment. So it's also like comparing different options and showing, okay, yeah, you're reducing your greenhouse gas emission, but you need to make sure that you're not creating new issues somewhere else in the full life cycle of the product. So it's good to reduce the impact during like the use phase, like what we see, like the coal power plant, but make sure we're not creating new concerns on like how we're mining and increasing the need for mining new materials.
Dr. Verder, did you have a response to that?
No, I think Anik put it very precisely, and you know, we also look at the sort of the end-to-end game, and so therefore the consumer himself or herself may be aware of only the use phase, but you know, some things that are, I mean, it's sort of well established now that some things that are more environmentally friendly during the use phase, you know, may actually be very environmentally unfriendly during the remanufacturing phase. So you know, the idea of, you know, let's remanufacture everything, or recycle everything, we know that that's not the case.
I'm most concerned about metal sourcing for, let's say, electric vehicle batteries applications, and we have such a short time frame to achieve a certain level of, you know, transportation milestones for electric vehicle fleets, for example, and also all the ethical concerns of mineral sourcing from foreign places, and you know, foreign control of processing, etc. And I feel that, especially after our first speaker, I was a little bit down, thinking that it takes a lot of time to really facilitate recycling, even things like advertising. So I guess my question is, how do you weigh into the impact that metal sourcing, and in particular the possibilities of recycling, it can really impact achieving the goals that we have for electric vehicles in 2025, for example?
So Gemma, maybe I'll start with a quick comment. I mean, as a department chair, I'm supposed to have a downing effect on people. So
You got it.
and our dean believes he has to have even a higher level of downing. But anyway, the issue about the minerals that you raised is quite pertinent. And we have, someone, in the department who specifically studies the use of, conflict minerals and other minerals in the supply management domain. So it is actually a, whole big Pandora's box, to go into. And there are some people who are only studying that, and it's a very, very important issue from my vantage point.
Yeah, I can add to that. That's like I talk about like the second life versus recycling. That's a little bit why, like Ford, for example, in the short term, it might be better to send battery to recycling instead of trying to expand their life for a few years, just because of that. Because like if it's good for the environment if we don't, like, there's still enough power in those batteries. They usually have like 80% of their life left. So in theory, we could use them for storage, but if you use them for storage for 5 years, that means like the next 5 years is really critical for the EV industry. So if we don't recycle them, that means it's more material we need to mine, and like mining more from those different countries is actually worse until we have like the infrastructure and enough volume from used car to be able to start recycling. We just like, even if we were recycling everything, like from, if the average lifetime of a car is 10 years, we don't have enough from like 5 years ago in 5 years to kind of ramp up to where we're supposed to go. So things are expected to get better by like 2030 in terms of having enough like supply, because it all depends on like all the chemistry will change too. That's another question. Like right now, the used batteries are really valuable, but there's also a lot of research that goes into making them from more like abundant materials. So then it kind of decreases the value of recycling them. So like it will play there, but I think back to what something you said too, like there's a lot of, right now, there's a lot of different technologies that compete for the same materials or the same batteries. So it's not just the EV storage, like it's not just the EV battery that are growing, it's all the storage at the same time, and they are competing for the same battery. So for me, it's more kind of the the two together that I'm kind of worried about. And it's the same for other things too, like everything, there's the scarce materials, but there's also like the abundant material that we should look into, because all the infrastructure we need for that, like for wind turbines or for solar panels, it's all a lot of like steel or aluminum. But like people talk about more deuterium, but like we're adding a lot of steel and aluminum, and everybody wants to take recycled material, but we might not have enough recycled material for everything we say we're going to do with recycled material. So mining is important.
I was thinking about a recent article I read, I think just a couple of days ago, in which they actually crunched the numbers, considering, for example, the demand for aluminum as you think about energy demands, and it is possible to recycle and achieve still those milestones. But for things like cobalt, which is the metal, one of the metals that we work with, it was simply impossible. Whether you, I mean, then it's the uncertainty of, you depend on the consumer and the lifetime of those batteries to really make it into the recycling process, so you don't have control over it. And a really big problem, I guess.
Yeah.
Great talk by both, really very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And it's precisely due to that uncertainties, we believe that use of, structured, mathematical models could help understanding the impact of those uncertainties, so that you can put the necessary policies in place. So, I mean, if there isn't sufficient amount of something, then, or cobalt, for example, then policy design should not be just by intuition only. That's kind of what we're trying to promote.
Let me ask, and Dr. Anctil, excuse me if you explain this, but if I understand some of what you were describing, you're trying to understand, is it more efficient to use a returned car battery for a storage battery for some other purpose, rather than deconstructing it and extracting the rare metals and then reconstructing a new battery? Is that essentially the kind of work you're engaged in, trying to make that Okay, thank you. That's
Yeah,
very
that's what I did
interesting.
for
Yeah.
Ford and like trying to figure out based on like their historical and like what they forecast will be the type of batteries coming back and like how
Mhm.
much they expect the cobalt or other materials demand based on their
Mhm.
current and future chemistry, like if they have enough material. So
And can you tell us your findings? Is it more efficient to deconstruct an old battery, or is it better to
yeah,
use it?
well, in terms of like supply, otherwise, like if we favor like the second life batteries in the short term,
Mhm.
that could increase by like 10% the amount of mining we need to do for like cobalt and manganese, just because of the
Mhm,
delay you're
mhm.
creating and returning that material. So,
Mhm.
but like after probably 2030, then we should use those batteries for second life batteries because they're great and they work good too for other applications. But it might create another issue in the short term.
Very interesting. Thank you. That's very thoughtful,
All right.
insightful.
Let me point out that a very similar set of issues have been around in the electronics side as well. I mean, and that relates to the issue of incentivizing the design of more environmentally friendly products. Because if you look at a computer or a desktop computer in particular, the issue becomes, I mean, do you cannibalize certain parts and use those parts in your newer models? Or do you go back to the material level and use, take advantage of the valuable material, in that computer, and whether you can use those parts in newer models depends on how you design those new models, whether they allow for the use of those or whether you design something from scratch so that you can use nothing. It's actually an interesting trade of style that we see in a number of places.
Imagine the confusion for the consumer. What do I do with this after I am done using it? And I know that's some of the work that you've led, Pete, at, how do we educate the general public on what do they do with a product that it's after they're done using it? I mean, the complexities here are just seem that consumers it's going to be hard for them to do the right thing, even if they want to do the right thing, whatever the right thing might be.
Well, I think the right thing is confusing for most people. So, and I think it's different though for like, I think for electric vehicles, the question too is like you have your car, like, and right now who's gonna take those battery back is unclear in like the old market, because right now like auto manufacturers, they want them back, so they have advantage of doing like warranty and replacement and everything because there's value. But if there's lower value, like it's unclear how this market will will turn. There are like people that there are like second life manufacturers, there are like recyclers and everything, but like who is it going to be, like the car manufacturers or like a different kind of ecosystem of but we'll see.
Yeah.
So I mean, it would be easier to know or do the right thing if the messaging from industry was clearer, and whether the industry, I mean, of course the story in the electric vehicles could be slightly different than the stories that I'm familiar with from the electronic side, because it seems like all the big players in the auto industry are engaging this, but the idea is that when Europe passed this, the WEEE directive, the draft of the directive was establishing targets for the collection targets for the amount of sold material. Okay, and the lobby argued that verbiage has been changed to collection targets on recycling targets on the collected material. So recycling what 60% of what you collected versus recycling 60% of what you sold are very different things. So the idea is that they can follow regulations by just making the collection centers a little inconvenient for you to return if they don't want to collect. They're not going to say they don't want to collect, but they can make it inconvenient. They can put them in longer distances from your house. And that's exactly what happened in
Yeah. Jim, you had a question.
No, it's just, how do we as Michigan State steer that conversation toward the right thing? Because it is very confusing out there. I have a fear that consumers are just going to start throwing junk in a landfill because they just don't know what to do with it. It's like I'm finally getting around to cleaning out my garage and trying to do the right thing, but I'm waiting for the local high school to come up with a electronics recycling day that benefits their sports program or something versus trying to actually figure out what to do with it. It's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I
Jim,
think. Yep.
sorry, go ahead, Annick.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think like electronic is confusing too, because what do we consider electronic? Like as soon as there's a cord in it, there's like metals and everything. So it could go in the same. And I had actually a question about that because like I work on solar panels for you that, and like that we get a lot of question about like what to do for like solar panels. Like in terms of like materials, it's really similar to a lot of electronics, but it seems to being developed, and it's going to be a different path for recycling like solar panels, but it is an electronic product and people want to recycle it, but there's not a great mechanism, and it's only in a few states that there are actually laws right now in the US about that. Like the only thing people know is don't put it in landfill, but it doesn't help you do anything with it. So like right now we're starting to like stockpile old modules that we're not sure what to do with it. They're not really toxic, but it's bad because you do solar panels because it's good for the environment. So you don't want to put that in the landfill, but there's not a good solution for recycling them. So it's confusing for sure for like the user who try to install like green power on their roof. So.
Well, you're right. I mean, what I can say is that in the electronic goods, actually it's electronic and electrical equipment, so it's even more wider. There is 8 categories that I'm familiar with. So I mean, computers would be like only one of those 8 categories, and another category I'm familiar with is the the air conditioning equipment, right? I'm not sure in those days when they enacted the regulation, the solar panels were as central to the discussion. So I mean, my memory is not serving me well here. I mean, I'm tempted to say there wasn't a category there, but I may be wrong. But I was going to say to Jim that you can't isolate from the fact that you're living in a state, who banned the use of plastic bags, and then they enacted another legislation to ban of using plastic bags. Okay, so that's the type of state you're living in. There's actually an actual ban on banning the use of plastic bags. I mean, if you can believe. I mean, this was as someone who has spent years and years in Canada, this was very funny for me to learn about this.
Technically, Verdad, I live in that one of those white states down south that's not doing anything. Except for trying to attract more manufacturing into our backyard. But I am a commuter to the state of Michigan, so I appreciate.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, no. I spent a lot of time up here, so I'm trying to do my best not to use any plastic bags at all. So,
any last questions for our panelists?
Should you wish to learn more about the Circular Economy Institute and the related topic of extended producer responsibility, visit the website ced.msu.edu. And thank you for your time. And if you wish to learn more about the topic, please contact the faculty who participated in the informal forum, or contact the MSU CCED at ced@msu.edu.